Hi, it's Leia here from the Center of Key, and today I want to share with you something about the 7 levels of eating. Now, this was something I learned about when I was studying macrobiotics many years ago, and it's based on the macrobiotic principles of the 7 stages of consciousness and how, we go through stages of consciousness as we grow up and get older. Now, the reason I'm posting this is because I actually was doing a little bit of research around the 7 levels of eating. I obviously had notes that I've taken from the course that I did, but I was curious to see what else I could find on the internet, and there really wasn't much out there. So I thought making this video would be a great start for me to share this with other people, and perhaps other people might be looking for this information. So firstly, what are the 7 levels? I'm going to go through them and give you some examples for each one, and then share a little bit about why I think it's important to understand and, think about these 7 levels as we go about eating. Now, we live in a society and culture that is obsessed with food. If you turn on the TV, there's cooking shows galore, there's cooking channels, there's food everywhere we go. And food is just available now at the click of a button on your smartphone, delivered to your door instantly. So I think now more than ever, having an understanding of these 7 levels is really important. So the first level is called the mechanical level. And I'm sure we can all relate to, going to the movies, getting a big box of popcorn and just mechanically shoveling that popcorn into our mouth as we're watching a movie. So that is a great example of the mechanical level of eating. So it's where we're eating mindlessly. We're probably more likely to be eating junk food. We might be eating on the run, such as in our car, walking down the street, or driving, and maybe even we're just eating because the clock is telling us to. It's a certain time of day and we know that's when we eat, and so we just go and eat then because that's the time to eat. So there's very little more, there's not very much thought put into the process. It's really just hand to mouth, and we're done. Okay. The second level is the sensory level. And so this is where our senses come more into play in the process. So we're eating what pleases our taste buds. We're eating what pleases our eyes. We're noticing the textures of the food as we're eating them. So there's a bit more awareness there. And I think that's what a lot of our society places value on, especially when you go out to restaurants and things like that. It's all about the texture and the sensory value that the food has, how it looks on the plate, how it's delivered to you. I like to think of sensory eating, like if you've ever had an oyster, you know that eating an oyster, it's that slimy, salty sensation as you're eating it, or even things like custard, ice cream, yogurt, they've got that sort of smooth mouthfeel. So those kinds of things, like being really aware of our senses when we're eating something. Now, the third level is called the emotional level. And this is where we might be eating to feed our emotions. We might be eating for a sentimental reason. So maybe your mum or your grandmother or your dad or your grandpa used to make a certain dish or a certain dessert, and you just remember every time you eat that, you think about them, you think about those memories that you had with that person. So there's this sentimental, emotional connection to the food that you're eating. Now, the next level, the 4th level, is the intellectual level. So this is where there's a bit more of a thought process involved around perhaps a specific diet or a specific trend or theory that's doing the rounds, as is very common in our society. There's always a new diet theory or a diet trend going around the place. For instance, low fat, no carbs, that type of thing. And there's this intellectual approach behind what we're preparing for ourselves to eat or going out and looking for, in the different food places. The 5th level is called the social level. And this is where there might be some sort of ethical principles behind what we're eating and why we're eating a certain way. So there might be social justice. It could be an environmental consciousness. We might be following a certain ethical principle. And for me, this is kind of the idea of plant-based eating, where we're thinking about the planet, we're thinking about sustainability, and that's the reason why we're choosing to eat a certain way. Now, being on this level doesn't mean we're not going to also eat according to other levels. I think it's important to understand that there can be overlaps. That's the word I was looking for. So some overlaps between, we could be on a plant-based diet, but still eating mechanically. So understanding that they're not all sort of standalone. Now, the sixth level is the philosophical or ideological level. So this is eating based on a certain philosophical principle or a certain philosophical approach. This is where things like religion might take a part in the way you choose and eat your food. So things like kosher food or halal food, or even being Seventh-day Adventist. There's different ways that people present food, prepare foods. There's different foods they eat and there's foods they don't eat according to these philosophies that have been passed down and passed down. Now, the seventh level is, I guess, what we're trying to attain at some way in the future, maybe if not already, and that's this idea of intuitive eating, and eating according to this idea of what you want, but knowing deep down what it is that your body needs. And this could be what your body needs, just because your cells need it, or it could be a combination of, sensory, emotional, all those things coming together. And I like to think of this level as just knowing what to eat internally, understanding that you're eating that for the greater good of yourself. Your future self understands that this intuitive way of eating is going to benefit you. And we can still have cravings, I think, across this level too, where we might be craving a certain type of food, but knowing that it's feeding us on a certain level and not getting caught up in the negativity around that, for instance, but enjoying and savoring. It might just be one bite of that chocolate that you need, or it might be just one spoon of that ice cream, but understanding that's feeding you on a deep level. But doing that with all types of food, not just the bad foods, but also the foods that serve us well. So the other idea I associate with the intuitive eating is this idea of eating and knowing when to stop eating. Yeah, a lot of us can just eat and keep eating because we're enjoying it so much. But this idea of knowing when you're full or just before you're full, and being aware of that. So that's the 7 stages. We've got mechanical, sensory, emotional, intellectual, social, philosophical, and intuitive. So 7 stages or 7 levels. Now, why is this important? If you're still watching this, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you being here and wanting to learn about this type of stuff. Basically, I think having that awareness of those 7 levels can help us when we're in a situation where thinking about eating, we can acknowledge, oh yeah, I'm mechanically eating at the moment. Is this really good for me? Or I'm just really want to enjoy the sensory level of eating today because, I'm feeling a certain way and I know this is going to make me feel a different way. And things like that. So having that awareness, to me, awareness is one of the biggest keys to having power on our health and well-being journey. So I think eating and meals is a valuable time for us as humans. I think, we do spend a lot of time eating mechanically and we pay the price for it later by becoming unwell, becoming sick. Knowing what the right food that is for us is really important, and learning more about the best foods to eat for optimum health and well-being is important too. And there are certain philosophies and certain intellectual levels associated with that, because there's a lot of science now backing up these more traditional approaches to eating, whole grains, fruit and vegetables, legumes, really basic principles, but there's definitely more science now and more time spent in the science to support that way of eating. I think a meal is a sacred time. It's a time for us to receive what we need from the universe. Ultimately, the universe, the sun, creates energy on this planet through photosynthesis in plants, and taking in that energy, whether it's through a plant or through an animal, is really important to understand that connection. So another thing about eating and meals is that nourishment is not just what we're putting in our mouths. It's what goes around that as well. It's perhaps the people that we're with or not with when we're eating. It's a state of mind when we're eating. It's also whether we're breathing, what our posture is. All these things combine. And I'm not saying we need to be aware of that every single meal, but just understanding that that is part of the process is a great place to start. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Leah. I'm an authentic wellbeing coach and a yoga teacher. I really appreciate you, and thank you so much for being here today. Let me know what you think about the 7 levels of eating. What have you learned, and what do you think you can bring to mind when you go to eat your next meal? All right, until next time, stay well.